the session here tonight and inviting me. So I'm a local physician. My background is in ER, and I've done primary care and college health and occupational health, many different settings. And I am I created this presentation to based on a lot of things I've seen in my practice over the past 15 years. So the title of my presentation is Environment in Our Health, and particularly how land and habitat conservation benefits our health. So it's kind of through this lens that we'll be looking at it. And just about a little bit about me, I'm a mother, a physician, and a biophiliac. I love nature, and so I'm bringing all this together in this presentation. I'm going to give you a unique experience, unless you're in medicine, of this is how we hold, these presentations to one another. We usually present by a patient, patient that we've seen, and give the presentation and diagnosis. So you're getting a little taste of what it's like to be in like a grand rounds type of thing in medicine. So these patients are actual patients that I have seen. And we're going to go through each one and relate it to the topic. So we'll go through with the first. First, I'm going to.
And I gotta get.
I want to also, before I jump into this, I want to just talk about how. When we talk about environmental issues, we tend to get very, I think someone might need to be on mute. There we go.
Yes, I'm muting. I would have everybody muted except for you.
I'm going into all this with optimism, because I think a lot of times we get very dystopian about the environment and our health. And I want to bring positivity, that there still seems to be so much that we can do to change this course that we're all kind of looking at, and that this price of progress model is exclusive of trying to think of real solutions to have progress and save the environment and maintain our health. And mostly the message is that there's so much that we can do locally, the whole act locally, think globally, because, I'm just kind of making a joke about an apple a day keeps the doctor away, because it's going to take more than just that apple at this point. So when I'm talking about land and habitat conservation, I just wanted to also define that quickly. It's just a process of protecting natural land, returning developed land to its natural state. And I also want to preface this that I'm a physician. I'm not an ecologist. I'm not a botanist. I'm trying to learn a lot. And I'm just kind of looking at all this through my physician's lens, and learning a lot too at the same time, and realizing that the act locally can stem from the fact that most of the land in the US is privately owned. And that if we can make efforts just even on our own land or our township's land, that we can make still a big impact. And a lot of my education about all this is through Talamy. And I still, defer to the experts. I appreciate that this is a multidisciplinary approach that requires many different fields coming together to figure out what to do for our future. And just that beautiful section 27 of the PA Constitution, that this is our right, and it's actually written there in the law. So with that background, I'm going to jump in, and I'm first going to talk about stormwater runoff, which is a very big topic, and how that relates to the actual patients I have seen. So I'm going to first talk about a 56-year-old female with recurrent sinusitis and chronic cough, and a 28-year-old male with diarrhea for 2 weeks. So I think I might be talking to a crowd that has good background about all this, so I don't need to really explain what is stormwater runoff and where it comes from. But just so you know, when I present this to other crowds that may not have the background, because what I'm really trying to do is appeal to people through maybe if they're not so concerned or their alarms are not up about the environment, perhaps through their health, I can bring that to their attention. So I do a lot of explaining about, what is stormwater runoff and impervious surfaces, um, and how the lawn. So I'm bringing how they're in their own properties, the manicured lawn can contribute to storm water runoff on their own property. Because I think oftentimes when we think about stormwater runoff, we think on larger scales, but it definitely becomes with people's big driveways and lawns and structures that it creates storm water runoff on their own properties. Um, and I like to make a pitch about the lawn and how other reasons to do away with it. The fact that we have to mow it, use chemicals, soil erosion, etc. So oftentimes, and even in my own house, with this ridiculous lawn around my house, realizing that water is getting into my housing and dwelling, and water has memory, and once it comes in, it will find its way to come in with each progressive large precipitation events, and eventually, once how water comes in your house, you have created an indoor mold problem. So a series of water intrusion events, large quantities of bio and mycotoxins form and the drying and wetness, and all of a sudden you have these spores, and once you have spores, it just gets deposited all over your house. um, and before, mold and sinusitis was very dismissed in the medical community, but more and more they're starting to acknowledge that a lot of respiratory tract issues, asthma, um, do have mold, especially when it becomes a chronic problem. Mold is becoming a recognized source, and the molds really present difficulty for a practitioner to diagnose for sinusitis, because it's this the fungi wrap themselves in this biofilm, and it's hard to treat. Oftentimes you get treated with antibiotics over and over, but the antibiotics it can make it worse. So you can't just antifungals are can be harmful too to use. So it makes treating your patients with chronic sinusitis very challenging. Um, and when with patients that I talk to, we start talking about where would they, maybe this is mold, and maybe where is the mold spores coming from? What is their house? Do they have water intrusion? What is their property like? So it kind of, my conversations with patients expand. Also, in the past few years, I've seen, to me, it seems kind of ironic living in a very rich country that's developed more and more of these waterborne illnesses. So oftentimes, I'll see like a young person who hasn't done anything special, no camping, no international travel, is coming in with this kind of chronic diarrhea. And they might grow. You send out their stool for culturing. You get back, these different parasites, cryptosporidium, and we're told in the medical establishment that sometimes these are just incidental findings. They're not, in a healthy person, they don't cause issues. But then when you keep seeing the same pattern, and it's hard not to conclude that I think this incidental pathogen is causing my patient's symptoms. And I do think it's becoming more and more of an issue with our large storms coming in, and increasing contamination of of our water treatment systems. and groundwater. I know a lot of the Canadian geese coming to the area also. So these parasites and pathogens exist in the ground, and the geese have been incriminated in adding a lot more to the sources of cryptosporidium. And these big rains don't dilute toxins and pathogens, which is kind of counterintuitive to people. And it's because drinking water outbreaks have been linked to runoff. And what happens when all the storms come in, they accumulate the sediment, block sunlight, and create a great reservoir for bacteria to flourish and parasites. And like in my own practice, I'm seeing more and more Americans are getting sick from water contamination. So we're seeing Giardia and cryptosporidium. And again, you know, it's kind of, some people may say, some other physicians or practitioners would say cryptosporidium is just a incidental finding. But when you see it more and more these days, it's hard to really write that off. And also came across that cryptosporidium is developing resistance to treatment with chlorine and other traditional methods of filtration. And you know, random studies are finding that even treated water are still contain these cryptosporidium eggs. So those are two scenarios where I've seen in my own clinical practice how, you know, our issues of stormwater locally is impacting our health. And you know, and once we kind of see that happening, we should take some action to try to address these issues of stormwater and how we use in our current land practices. So next, when I go into talking about some other illnesses, I just wanted to introduce the concept of zoonotic diseases, because this is sort of a broad topic of some of the specific diseases I'm going to talk about. So zoonotic diseases are diseases transmitted by animals to humans through some kind of vector, a mosquito, a tick, or from their urine or bites like rabies. And more our infectious diseases are zoonotic sources. And that's sort of changing, and as opposed to other infectious diseases that in the 100 years ago we were seeing. And this increase in zoonotic disease is pretty clear. It's due to our human activity on many levels. There's also a lot of attention that the zoonotic diseases are becoming more common because what we're doing to our land and habitats. We're bringing animals into these new environments created by humans, and the animals together congregating in ways that they didn't evolutionarily develop, as well as hanging out with us more. And so this creates opportunities for viruses to jump species and also create new viruses. And it's not just when we destroy habitats and reduce number of species, but we also are, and I'm sure everyone here on this talk understands the importance of biodiversity of species. And so when we reduce number of species and have more general species, those are the ones that are more likely to survive and also be amplification hosts for the zoonotic diseases. And I always make sure that I don't scare people away about with the concept of zoonotic diseases in animals around humans, that we shouldn't fear the wild, but we just need to recognize that this is happening and maybe change our practices. So first, the first of the zoonotic diseases, it's very popular around here, Lyme disease. I'm sure most people on this talk have probably been diagnosed with it or had a family member. And this 11-year-old, I mean, I can't count. It's numerous uh, times I've diagnosed Lyme disease in patients, including my own 11-year-old child, who I'm so vigilant about doing tick checks. And one day he comes down and he's like, "Mommy, look at my knee." And it's this huge, boggy, swollen knee. And that's a clincher for Lyme disease in children. They're fine. And all of a sudden they have this Lyme arthritis that does respond to antibiotics very well, thank goodness. So Lyme disease, its vector is ticks, and I'm sure we all know, that the ticks require blood meals in hosts. These ticks have different, it's the Ixodes ticks, and it has different types of hosts. So there's hosts that are called reservoir hosts, and the reservoir hosts are the ones that have Lyme in them. And then there's non-reservoir hosts that they don't carry the disease. I'll show you on the next. This is more a pictorial explanation of what I'm saying. So on the left we have the bird and the mice. So these guys can carry Lyme and have just lived their whole lives with Lyme disease. The larger the tick hosts and non-reservoirs here, which is the cattle and the deer, they're non-reservoir hosts. So they may get bitten by a tick that has Lyme, but they have this innate ability to eliminate the bacteria. So they don't walk around with Lyme disease. So if they get infected, they fight off the infection and are cleared of Lyme. And then us on the right, we're the a dead end host, we're called, because we don't continue in the cycle of the transmitting the bacteria. So so just putting that aside right now, the idea of the different hosts, the development of a tick from a larvae to adult can take many years, and in this time span of years, it goes on the different types of hosts. So it has a lot of time to contract Lyme, the bacteria from the reservoir species. And once, so a tick can be born, and it doesn't contain Lyme. And when it goes and feeds on a mice that has Lyme in it, now this tick retains the bacteria throughout its own life cycle. And as it goes through, falls off the mouse and then goes onto another species, that tick will now transmit to that other species. And the time that it may take for a tick to transmit the disease once it's feeding is a little controversial. So in this area, it's really the number one criminal is the white-footed mouse. Is responsible for being the big transmitter of Lyme in this area. So if you see a white-footed mouse, most likely it has Lyme, and whichever tick feeds on it, that tick is very likely to pick up Lyme from this guy. But it gets interesting when the ticks, they need these different animals in the different cycles of their lives, but the ticks like a variety of different species to feed on. And there's some evidence that they actually may prefer the larger animals. And that's better if ticks prefer them, because these larger species don't carry Lyme, they don't have the incidence of carrying Lyme, although they do play a role in their feeding cycle. So, so this has led to the idea that when they've done different studies, that those areas with a high risk Lyme disease transmission have a high density of reservoir hosts and a low number of those non-reservoir hosts. So then if all the ticks have available to them are the white-footed deer, I'm sorry, white-footed mouse, then they are more likely Lyme disease is going to explode. But if you dilute it with other species around to give the tick choices, then different studies have shown that that decreases the incidence of Lyme in that area, and it's called the dilutional effect. So there's a few studies. This is just one that's done in New York in a largely oak forest landscape. And it's a crazy study. I'm not going to get into the details of, but they, in this area, they were able to quantify the presence of these different types of other species, like the one in red is squirrel, the yellow is shrew, and this is showing the impact of the presence of this particular animal and its dilutional effect in the incidence of Lyme disease found in the area. So the more squirrels there are, the less Lyme disease will be present. They find that by testing the different nymphs, the tick nymphs, to see if they're carrying the bacteria. So this is showing pretty much this dilutional effect that we're talking about. And when we talk about why aren't there more species to have to this dilutional effect, we have habitat loss. Although, I don't, this is kind of simplifying Lyme disease. There's other factors that have played a role in the increase in Lyme disease, climate change. But there's a large consensus that it's a lot of it does have to do with changes in our habitat loss. And that a lot of these studies show that the dilutional effect is an incentive to maintain a high diversity and stable community composition through sustainable land practices. And even just different studies have shown that the smaller forest fragments it's the increased prevalence of Lyme bacteria there is. So that's sort of another angle of it. And some people might think that, Lyme disease the bacteria has sort of changed its behavior, and that's why it's more prevalent. But I came across that when they sequence the genome of the Lyme bacteria, it goes back thousands of years ago. It's not a new bacteria. It's always been around. Nothing has changed about it genetically that's made it more transmissible. So, that kind of hypothesis is dismissed now. And when you just read about it, it's just it's cogent, the argument that ecological changes have created more of an opportunity for this bacterium to be in our lives. So, there's a lot of differing opinions on how to combat Lyme disease in our area. And, and I like to talk about what is epidemiologically and ecologically meaningful. Do we just get rid of the mice, the ticks, the deer, the tick tubes? And to me, some of those are fine to do, but I think that there's just Band-Aids. And I think if we acknowledge the source of what is behind this increased incidence, that if we put our efforts into more habitat restoration and land conservation, then we will see the benefits of that in our exposure to Lyme disease. And we should always caution against these, quick, short-sighted solutions, because there's one study that showed when they eliminated the white-footed mice, then they realized that was affecting the eastern oak trees, because the mice are actually keeping the gypsy moths in check. So we just don't. This ecological web is so complex. We really don't know if we're really doing the right thing. And I also wanted to let everybody know, as a practitioner, that there's this free tick testing in PA, where you can just mail you register and you mail your tick, and they will, for free, let you know if your tick contains Lyme, and And now it's not even Lyme so much. There's this whole slew of other bacteria and viruses that these ticks, Ixodes, can transmit as well. So you get that information. So it's a good thing to know. So next, I'm going to talk about West Nile virus, which was kind of bigger, more hot topic previously, but it's still an issue. And you know, it may present mostly in the office as someone with sort of non-specific symptoms, kind of like flu-like in the middle of the summer. So, you know, most people do fine with West Nile virus, and you would never know it was West Nile virus. But then when someone has a complication and ends up in the hospital and they do a spinal tap and isolate this as the source, then you know, oh, well, we have West Nile virus around in the area. So again, this is another zoonotic disease. The birds are the reservoir. They carry the virus. The mosquitoes take it from the birds to the humans. And when we talk about West Nile virus, we talk about hot spots where there's increased circulation of the virus. And it has to do with the specific environmental conditions. This is just a picture of how it all works. You know, when people think about West Nile virus, they think about just mosquitoes, just get rid of standing water during wet seasons. But that it's kind of counterintuitive that doesn't really take care of the problem, because ironically, a lot of the outbreaks in West Nile virus have been found when there's dry summers and more drought conditions. And the hypothesis behind that is that yeah, everyone, all the different birds and mosquitoes are all coming to the same water source, the water seeking behavior. And that's why they have increased contact with each other. And what we've done to our living spaces, outside living space, creates a great opportunity for that to happen with the way we've created our suburbs. So there are some studies to support this, that protected natural land areas actually were not significantly associated with high incidence of West Nile virus. And these crazy studies where they found that those with less than 40% forest covers, the less forests, the more increased incidence of West Nile virus compared to those with 70% forest cover. And that's it's not just the space, but it's also a habitat supporting the species diversity, where they found increased bird diversity was correlated with decreased West Nile virus infection. So those are just very interesting studies that, again, goes back to, you know, we've destroyed these habitats and sort of created an environment for these zoonotic diseases to emerge. So I'm going to just touch a little bit about COVID-19. There is some relevance to how COVID came about when we talk about zoonotic diseases. It is a zoonotic disease. And, you know, the classic, you know, unfortunately, have seen patients with COVID, and, you know, the classic is, you know, loss of taste and smell is a typical presentation. So there are lots of conspiracy theories underlying this, the virus origins, but there's more and more evidence showing that bats are known reservoirs for coronaviruses. Even before coronavirus or COVID too, we knew that bats are reservoirs for coronaviruses. In fact, 31% of their virome are coronaviruses. There's many different strains of coronaviruses. And that these different analyses in the past have shown that there's been transmission of coronaviruses between bats and humans. Um, so, the fact that these viruses have been circulating in bats for who knows how long, um, that has not, that's been there all along. So what has changed is the probability that our changes in our environment have brought bats and humans into closer proximity and allowing the virus to jump species. Um, then there's studies to support that that in places where like this one, and scientists in Brazil have found that the virus was, there's increased prevalence of the virus when in bats that were in deforested areas compared to the bats captured in pristine woodland had a less prevalence of the virus in them. And the bats' behaviors are also changing. Usually they're separated by species, but now they're clustering by geographic location, and that we think that is due to the anthropogenic forces of us changing their habitats. And so that's pretty much all right now with COVID and as a zoonotic disease. And I just hope that we keep this in mind, as we keep seeing new zoonotic diseases emerge, that these treatments and vaccines are really afterthoughts and band-aids. And perhaps we should really take away from all this that we need to think of ecologically meaningful answers to this problem that we're just going to keep seeing over and over again. And just real quick, this is not, this topic about environmental toxicology does also impact our natural habitats, even if we don't, cut down all the trees to develop. A lot of toxins can also destroy habitats unbeknownst to us. And so I just wanted to bring into how environmental toxicology, could that have play a role in the disease severity and COVID? Does it we know toxins are lipophilic, they're stored in our fat cells. Toxins are now more and more understood to play a role in chronic disease, and urban areas where they hit harder with COVID, where there's more severe disease in urban areas because of higher concentrations of toxins. And I'm not going to go into this, just these toxins that I've listed here, always you hear them more as endocrine disruptors, but they are also found to be immune disruptors. And these toxins, once they can affect our immune systems, there's some evidence that we can, that is inherited. We can pass that on, our immune dysfunction, pass it on to our offspring. They've done studies in mice where they were exposed to a toxin, and they found that the subsequent generations continue to have this impaired immune response to this flu virus that they were exposed to. And also epigenetics, once we change our genes are turned on or turned off by a toxin, this can be passed on as well. And something else I just want to bring up now that I have brought COVID to everyone's attention is that the COVID waste, and in our short-term response, again, we might be creating a new problem that is affecting our environment and habitats. The amount of vials and swabs and gloves, gowns, face shields, and takeout food packaging. This is just another crisis. I feel like that's just developing right in front of us. And hopefully some attention will be drawn to it sooner than later. And then just to end, the last one, anxiety and mental health, and how I'm sure we've all heard a lot about how the environment and the time we spend in the environment has an impact on this. But I just wanted to bring the science more into it. So very common, something to see in your practice as a practitioner, to see a lot of presentations of anxiety. 41-year-old male with shortness of breath. You do the huge workup to eliminate cardiac and pulmonary, and it's anxiety is a real physical experience for people, and you realize it comes out in a lot of physical symptoms. And it's about how we forget how to breathe. We're always in the fight mode, of the sympathetic mode. And I just wanted to talk about some physiological manifestations of anxiety, and talk about how studies with the environment have shown to impact us by changes in these objective measures. So, when we're in our sympathetic fight or flight nervous system, we can measure that by heart rate and blood pressure. Also, our brain activity, the different brain waves reflect what kind of state we might be in. So with this background, now we can kind of jump into different studies of how being in nature, and I may use that word loosely, nature, because it can mean different things, but that just being around the greenery and the forest has objective impacts on our physiology, and we can measure people's brain waves to see. It's one thing to ask a person, do you feel relaxed? You're sitting out here in this beautiful national park, do you feel relaxed? But then when you measure their brain waves or measure their blood pressure and heart rate, you get an objective answer. So there's multiple studies that show the effect of nature on the human body. The studies reducing stress and lower scores for minor post-surgical complications. I thought this was funny. Received fewer negative comments in the nurse's notes, needing less analgesics, pain medication. So they're very interesting studies that you go through, and when you take it the next step, you wonder that that we evolved with nature in a way that maybe beyond our understanding, outside of like the notion that it makes us feel relaxed, that perhaps there's something that's going on through signals in our brain that we're unaware of that are impacting our health. And the biggest one that we know that is the impact of light on melatonin and our sleep-wake cycles. But what about seeing more green, and the just even the green light waves? How is that impacting my brain beyond my conscious realization that it may be going through my brain to impact my immune system? And then it's not just vision, it's also about smells. When I'm outside taking a hike and smelling the soil, is it affecting me in ways we're completely unaware of? And so this is a field that needs a lot more exploration. And we're just, I think, just chipping away at the very tip of the iceberg with this, to realize when we're just realizing light going through our brain beyond our interpretation of what we're seeing, is how it's affecting us. And just some other studies where this doctor, somehow, I don't know how she got this study approved, but it was just in 2004, she was giving this bacterial serum that she isolated from the soil, this Mycobacterium vaccae, and she was doing it to boost their immune systems. But then patients actually reported feeling happier and suffered from less pain than their controls. And then they looked into this and they found these mood boosting effect of this soil bacteria because it released chemicals that act on serotonin. So I just think that that's very interesting that, being in the habitats and environments that we evolved with is probably so much more complicated than we realize and beneficial to our health. So, my mission in having this talk and making people think about how, land conservation, habitat conservation, and is affecting our health. Maybe that will make folks more motivated to make changes. I think I would like my fellow colleagues to bring this more into the clinical arena, where with engaging their patients, that this is an opportunity to educate. We talk about diet, helmets, and seatbelts. I know our time is very limited with patients, and we can barely cover half of what we want to in this crunch time. But I mean, hopefully one day we'll be able to really delve into this as preventative in our preventative measures, to talk about your property and pesticide use, reduced use by eco products. Think about which each prescription medication, when I prescribe a medication, I talk about side effects, but do patients realize that they excrete the metabolites of this medication, and that impacts the environment too? That's something that I think we should be drawing some more attention to as well. And I'm just encouraging people to, again, act locally, be informed in your township, which we're all here on the EAC. I'm on the Charlestown EAC, and I think it makes me feel like we're able to make some impact locally. Working on our own properties, it can be very powerful. And this is, just the rest of the slide is sort of summarizing everything I've said. And I don't know if people know about the Penn State Extension webinar series that's going on now. It's going through March. Woods in Your Backyard. So it's been really great. I mean, I've learned a lot thus far, but I just, in case people didn't know about this webinar series, I just wanted to bring it to your attention. And this book, if everyone's familiar, Douglas Tallamy, Nature's Best Hope, A New Approach to Conservation That Starts in Your Yard. Great book, very, very inspiring for me. And I just wanted to have the slide from land use in my own township, Charlestown Township. I don't know how it might compare to East Nantmeal, but we have a lot of efforts into land conservation and just trying to do more and more to preserve that. And that's it. I have references if anybody has specific questions about anything specific I said. Please feel free to contact me outside of this talk. I can be happy to answer questions or anything.
There were a couple questions, Vita, that were posed about the water runoff issues. One of them was sort of a mention or just something to think about with water being a privatized commodity and who's responsible for clean water. It was posed a question about Nestle or, things of that direction. And then I don't know if you want to address that first, if you have any thoughts on that.
So who's responsible? What is the question?
Yeah, the question is kind of, when we talk about land ownership, we think from that direction, but where's with water getting more privatized, who's responsible for clean water? So when we talk about these issues of polluted water, essentially.
Oh, right. For the water, with regards to water treatment systems, and that's so for public water, I think that, usually, I mean, it's mostly Aqua is the main water supplier in the area, I believe. I've tried to interview different people at Aqua about, the different, what measures they take and how they test their water and everything. But I think if you are on public water, there should be ways of getting in touch with the company that provides the water to ask them questions. I hope that's
And then that brings up-
answering the question.
I think so. That brings up the next question, which was, what do you do when you have private water? You have your own well water. What do you do with those waterborne diseases? How do you treat for that?
Well, I know for my own water, and I know, we could talk about water forever. I pretty much am putting my faith in my UV light that it's going to kill everything. And I do test. I fork out the money to test my water. I think you can get pretty reasonable testing for parasites and bacteria. That's pretty routine. I actually worry more about the chemicals. So I've sent out the test for that large panel for different chemicals. And I have to say, I've been pleasantly surprised with the performance of my groundwater in this area. So, but as far as I know, the UV light is the best treatment for your own water system. I don't know if anybody else, if someone else has something else to suggest.
We have a carbon filter as well. So living in Mexico for a while, I learned how to make sure that we had clean water, because that's not a given when you're given water. So we had, in this house now, we also have like a big carbon filter, and we have, of course, pre-filtration, and we have UV as well. But I think the carbon's a big one if you're concerned with chemical.
Oh yeah, I have to also, for my drinking water, I have a reverse osmosis filtration system. But then some people say, well, that strips you of all your minerals. You don't get any minerals in your water, and you can go crazy, trying to
Just put
find the
some Himalayan
perfect
sea salt
water.
on your food. Someone said our reverse osmosis is better than a UV light, which is true. UV lights can miss some things. It was also questioned, who owns water? Aqua is a private company, not a public utility.
I thought Aqua does provide at least in the, no, that's a good question. I don't really know. I haven't looked too much into that because I have my own well. So I don't know who's the main supplier. Who's the main supplier of the public water, and I guess it's area specific.
Yeah, I don't know either, because we have well water and I've never even thought about utility.
Are there any other questions?
I don't see any other written at the moment.
Can I just say something? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, my name's Glenn Wanger, and I'm on the West Pikeland EAC. And I'm just informing you that are listening, we have a speaker, a Zoom speaker on March 23rd. It's called Honey, I Shrunk the Lawn. And it's on, it's a catchy title, and it's restoring lawns to native habitat. So I'm just informing you that you can go to our website and there's a link there for the Zoom meeting.
Oh, great.
If you would send me that email, I'll post it to the East Nantmeal.
Excuse me?
If you'll send me an email about that with the information, I'll post it to the East
Okay,
Nantmeal.
I will. Okay, and what's your name?
I'm Diana. If you send it to east.nantmeal, EAC.
Okay, I got it. Same address. Okay,
Yes.
I'll do it. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you.
Well,
Very informative.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
If
I
there are no-
appreciate everyone coming to listen, and it's if it for all those of us on a mission to kind of do the environmental advocacy. Maybe hopefully I give you some background where you can, maybe if someone's not clicking about just making changes, you can say, well, it's impacting your health in this way. Maybe they would be more apt to react.
We recorded this
Yep.
meeting and we'll post it at the eastnatmeal.org site, so you can access it there.
Okay, great.
Great,
So I
thank you
think there
very
was
much.
also-
This was excellent, absolutely excellent.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
Yeah, I
it.
think it's an area that really to focus our thoughts on is just critical. So I really appreciate it. I did put a little blurb about the Penn State Master Well Owners Network in the chat box, because those folks, there's a training program and they have a lot of information about private well owners, and they're a great resource.
Okay, thank you.
So that's good, because Peggy just mentioned that the water from our township is public water and supplies Philadelphia. So we have a responsibility for its cleanliness. So that's actually an excellent segue into that. That's very interesting, the master well owners.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Vita. Does anybody have any other questions or?
I just wanted to say excellent presentation, and it's so well organized and your slides are great. You put a lot in, really well done.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Yes, thanks. All right.
Well, stay healthy, everybody.
Okay, thank you.
James, thank you too for bringing this to us.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I'm so glad that we were able to make this happen. And,
Yeah.
It's really wonderful to have you, Vita, like I said. So
Thank
yeah,
you.
I'm glad
Thank
that
you
we
for
were able to
having
get
me.
this out.
Thank you.
Good
Good
night,
night,
everyone.
everyone.
Good night.
Bye.
Wonderful night.